The Greco-Roman wrestler challenged Bruce Lee. This is philosophy, not fighting. 7 seconds later, silence fell over the field. He said it like a man closing a door. This is philosophy, not fighting. And for 7 seconds after that, nobody in the room made a sound. This is the story the way the old students tell it. The wrestler, the small man in the doorway, the silence that came after. Nobody agrees on the year. Nobody agrees on the city. But everyone who tells it agrees on the 7 seconds and on what was lost inside them. The gymnasium sat above a hardware store in a part of the city that tourists never found, up a narrow flight of stairs that smelled of chalk and old rope. It had been a wrestling hall for 3 decades, a real one, not a showroom for trophies. The floor was a lattice of canvas mats gone gray at the seams, patched in places with electrical tape. A single bank of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and when the wind came off the harbor, the whole building seemed to lean into it, groaning like something alive. On the night the legend begins, it was full. Not with spectators exactly, with the kind of crowd that only gathers for people who take their body seriously. Wrestlers in singlets, slick with sweat from an evening session. A boxing coach who trained 2 floors down and always wandered up when he heard raised voices. A pair of judo players still in their GIs, arguing quietly in the corner about a throw one of them had missed 3 times running. And near the back wall, sitting on an overturned equipment crate with his jacket folded over his knee, a small man nobody in the room had been introduced to. He had come in an hour earlier alone and asked the man at the desk if he could watch. Just watch. He'd paid the small fee for visitors, found a seat out of the way, and settled into the specific kind of stillness that some people carry and most people don't. The stillness of someone who is resting, not waiting. Nobody in that gymnasium knew his name yet. That's part of what makes the legend work. The room, on this particular night, belonged to a man named Anatoly Grebenshchikov, though by then most people had shortened it, out of exhaustion, not disrespect, to simply Grebe. He was 31 years old, 6'1", 230 pounds distributed the way a heavyweight Greco-Roman wrestler's weight distributes. Not sculpted for a photograph, but built the way a bridge is built for load. He had wrestled since he was 9, provincial titles by 16, a national junior championship at 19 that people still talked about because of how he'd won the final. Not on points, but by lifting a man 20 pounds heavier clean off the mat and driving him down so hard the referee had to check the boy was still conscious before raising Grebe's arm. 2 Olympic cycles, 1 bronze medal, which he never mentioned, and 1 gold, which he mentioned constantly, in the particular way that champions mention the thing that costs them the most to talk about casually. His specialty was the par terra, the ground phase, the crushing, patient grind where Greco-Roman wrestling does its quiet violence. No leg attacks allowed in his sport. No grabbing below the waist. Just 2 men, upper bodies only, trying to find enough leverage to break the other one's structure and pin him to canvas. It is, wrestlers will tell you, one of the purest tests of strength through technique that exists in combat sport. No strikes, no submissions, just control. Grebe had never lost a match by pin. Not once, not in 22 years. He had also, in the last several months, developed an opinion about martial arts films. It wasn't hostility exactly. It was closer to contempt. The specific contempt an athlete who has bled for his sport can develop toward anything that looks like it might be performance, wearing the costume of combat. He'd seen the posters. He caught fragments of a movie on a television in a bar once. A small man in yellow moving through opponents with impossible speed, striking without appearing to wind up. And he had laughed, not unkindly. Just the laugh of a man who has spent his whole life learning what real contact costs and doesn't believe what he's watching pays that cost. Choreography. He'd said to his training partners, more than once, beautiful choreography, not fighting. The small man on the equipment crate was, by any measure available to that room, an unremarkable presence. 5'7", maybe 140 pounds, wearing dark trousers and a simple collared shirt with the sleeves rolled once. No GI, no belt, no track suit with a Federation crest on the chest. He watched the wrestling session with an attention that a few people noticed and most didn't. The particular quality of someone reading movement rather than simply seeing it. cataloging weight shifts and grips and recoveries the way a musician might listen to a rehearsal for the mistakes underneath the polish. When Grebe finished his session, 3 matches against progressively larger training partners, all ending the way Grebe's matches usually ended, with a controlled collapse of the other man's structure and the flat slap of a pinned back against canvas. He toweled off near the crate where the small man sat and noticed him properly for the first time. "You're not one of ours," Grebe said. "Not unfriendly. Just an observation." "No," the man said. "I was invited by a friend of the gym. I hope it's all right that I watched." "You wrestle?" "No. Box. Not the way you mean it." Grebe smiled. The first real smile of the exchange. The smile of a large man who has decided the conversation in front of him is more interesting than he expected. "So what do you do?" "Martial arts," the man said. "Chinese systems, mostly. Some of my own." Something in the room shifted, very slightly. The boxing coach in the corner looked up from the tape he'd been rewrapping. One of the judo players stopped mid-sentence. It wasn't that anyone recognized the face. It was the particular calm with which the answer came. The total absence of the apology that usually accompanies a small man telling a room full of large men what he does for a living. Grebe's smile held, but something underneath it hardened by a few degrees. "Kung Fu," he said, and there was, for the first time, an edge to the word. "I've seen Kung Fu. In the cinema. Then you've seen an actor's version of it." "Is that not what all of it is? An actor's version?" Grebe wrapped a towel around his neck, folded his arms, and the room, without quite meaning to, arranged itself into an audience. "I don't say this to insult you, friend. I say it because I've spent my whole life on a mat learning what it actually costs to move another man's weight against his will. 22 years. 2 Olympics. I have never lost a match by pin. Not once. And I have never once, not once, seen anything in a kung fu film that looked like it would survive real contact with someone who has done that kind of work." A few of the wrestlers laughed, not cruelly, just the low laugh of men agreeing with something they'd wanted to say for a while. The small man on the crate didn't laugh and didn't look away. "You may be right," he said. "Most of what people call kung fu on a screen is performance. I wouldn't defend it. It isn't what I do." "Then what do you do?" The small man was quiet for a moment, not searching for the words, just deciding whether the room deserved them. "Most of what people call kung fu on a screen is performance," he said. "What I do isn't for a screen. And it isn't really about fighting at all. Not the way you mean the word." Grebe's arms stayed folded, but his weight shifted, the way a man's weight shifts when he has decided a thing must be settled and not merely discussed. And what came out of him was not an insult but a challenge, thrown across the mat the way a champion throws down a challenge. "Then prove it," he said. "Get on the mat with me. 2 minutes. No pins needed. Just show me your philosophy holds up against real weight, real grip, real pressure. If it does, I'll shake your hand and call you a master in front of everyone here. If it doesn't," he spread his hands, an almost generous gesture, "then you'll have learned something about the difference between what looks true and what is true." The room turned, as one, toward the small man on the crate, waiting to see whether the challenge would be answered or quietly declined. He stood, unhurried, and looked at Grebe with the same calm he'd carried since he'd walked in an hour earlier. "This is philosophy," he said. "Not fighting. But I'll show you both, if that's what you need to see." 7 seconds. That's the part everyone who tells this story insists on. Not because anyone in the room was counting. Nobody had a stopwatch. Nobody was thinking in numbers. But because the silence that followed the words had a specific, physical weight to it. The kind that makes a room feel smaller. The fluorescent light kept buzzing. Somewhere below, a car passed on the wet street. And for those 7 seconds, nobody, not Grebe, not the wrestlers, not the boxing coach, not the judo players who'd stopped arguing entirely, said a single word. It wasn't fear, exactly, not yet. It was the specific unease that comes when a sentence doesn't land the way it was supposed to. Grebe had expected an argument, or a boast, or a nervous laugh, and a change of subject. What he'd gotten instead was a sentence that didn't defend anything and didn't concede anything either. It simply closed the door calmly on the entire premise of the challenge. "All right," the small man said, breaking the silence himself this time. But I'd ask for different terms. Name them. No pins. No score. If I put you on the ground once, cleanly, we stop. That's all I need to show you. And it should be all you need to see. Grebe laughed, a real laugh this time, loud enough that it echoed off the tin roof. You want to end a match with a Greco-Roman champion before it starts, and you think one throw will do it? I don't think anything, the small man said, standing, folding his jacket and setting it on the crate with the same unhurried care he'd used to sit down an hour earlier. I'm telling you what I need to show you. You may find it isn't enough. They cleared the center mat the way rooms clear for these things, not with announcement, but with a kind of collective, wordless agreement, bodies shifting backward until a rough circle had formed. Someone killed the second bank of fluorescence, not for effect, just because it had always been a little too bright for the far side of the room, and now, with everyone's attention pulled to the center, the dimness felt appropriate. Grebe stripped to his singlet, the deep red one with the Federation patch still stitched crookedly to the left breast from a repair job years old. He rolled his neck, bounced twice on the balls of his feet, and settled into the low crouch that 22 years had made as natural to him as standing upright, knees bent, hips low, arms bladed forward, the stance of a man built to absorb collision and return it with interest. The small man did not change clothes. He rolled his sleeves once more, took off his shoes, and stood on the mat in his socks with his hands loose at his sides. Weight even. Nothing about his posture announcing readiness the way Grebe's did. You should know, Grebe said, not unkindly, settling into position across from him, that I outweigh you by 90 pounds. In my sport, weight matters more than anything else in the world except technique, and I have both. I know, the small man said. That's not new information to either of us. The boxing coach, standing at what had become the informal edge of the circle, called the start the way he'd called 1,000 sparring rounds in his life, because nobody else in the room seemed inclined to. Go. Grebe moved the way Greco-Roman wrestlers move when the moment matters, not with a rush, but with a controlled, gathering pressure, closing distance in a half-crouch designed to make his opponent choose between backing up into a corner that didn't exist or accepting the collision. His hands found the small man's shoulders in the traditional overhook grip, the entry he'd used to open 10,000 matches in his life, and for one instant it looked exactly like it was supposed to look. A large man's hands settling onto a smaller man's frame, weight already beginning its downward, inevitable transfer. And then the frame wasn't there. It's the detail every version of the story insists on, however much the rest of it drifts, that Grebe's grip closed on nothing that resisted, because the small man's shoulders had rotated a few degrees at the exact moment of contact, redirecting the force along a line that ran past him rather than through him. Not a block, not a struggle, a door opening instead of a wall standing. Grebe's own momentum, unmet, carried him half a step forward. Before he could recover his base, he felt two things happen almost simultaneously. A light pressure at his right elbow, guiding rather than striking, and the floor tilting under his lead foot in a way that made no sense to a body that had spent 22 years learning exactly how the floor was supposed to feel under a leg planted that way. He went down, not thrown in the dramatic, cinematic sense. There was no arc through the air, no crash. He simply found himself no longer standing. His own forward force turned back against the base that had produced it, his shoulder meeting the canvas with a controlled softness that told him, even as it happened, that the man who'd put him there had chosen exactly how hard the landing would be. The whole exchange, the grip, the redirection, the fall, took perhaps 2 seconds. What followed took longer and mattered more. The room did not make a sound, not the wrestlers who had watched Grebe pin 3 men that same evening. Not the boxing coach, who had refereed enough contests to know when something outside his experience had just happened in front of him. Not the judo players, who understood throws better than anyone else present and still could not, in the seconds that followed, articulate to each other what they had actually witnessed. 7 seconds passed, the same 7 seconds, the story insists, echoing the 7 that had opened the whole encounter, before anyone in that gymnasium remembered how to make noise. Grebe lay on the mat for a moment, staring up at the buzzing fluorescent light, running the collision back through his mind and finding no place in it where he'd made an identifiable mistake. His grip had been correct. His entry had been correct. And somehow none of it had mattered. The small man extended a hand before Grebe had fully processed what to do with his own. Grebe looked at it for a long moment, the specific, suspended moment every version of the legend lingers on, because it is the moment the story stops being about winning and starts being about something else. Then he took the hand and let himself be pulled upright. And when he was standing, he did something that surprised the room more than the throw had. He bowed. Not deeply, not theatrically. Just a small, genuine inclination of the head that athletes give each other when something real has passed between them. "I have wrestled for 22 years, Grebe said, and his voice had lost the edge it carried before the match, replaced by something quieter. "I have never been put down that fast. Not by a bigger man. Not by anyone." "You weren't beaten," the small man said. "Nothing here proved your sport isn't real, or that your strength isn't real. I only showed you something different. That strength meeting strength is one kind of contest, and strength meeting absence is another. When you reached for structure, I gave you none to fight. That's not a technique you can drill against easily, because it isn't really a technique at all. It's a decision not to be where the force expects you to be." Grebe was quiet for a moment, turning this over. "That's the philosophy then, not fighting. That's part of it. Philosophy without a body behind it is just talk. But a body without philosophy behind it, that's just weight, moving until something stops it. You have both, more than you think. You've spent your whole life learning where force belongs and how to receive it. I only asked a different question than the ones your sport usually asks." "What question is that?" "Where am I not, when you expect me to be there?" They talked for a long while after that, the wrestlers drifting closer, the boxing coach pulling up a folding chair, the judo players finally abandoning their argument about the missed throw in favor of a much larger one. Grebe asked about stance, about how a man could commit to no stance at all and still be ready for anything. The small man answered by showing, not explaining, standing loose and relaxed, and then, without any visible gathering of tension, simply not being where a slow, careful push aimed itself a moment later. Someone asked whether this was a style with a name. The small man considered the question the way he seemed to consider everything, not quickly, and not for effect. "It has a name," he said, "but the name matters less than the idea behind it. Styles harden. They become rules you follow instead of truths you test. The moment you decide you must always block this way, or always attack that way, you've built yourself a cage and called it training. I'd rather understand what actually works against what's actually in front of me, and let that be the whole system." Grebe, for his part, never fully let go of his own art that night, and the legend is careful to say so. Every telling insists he remained, until the end of his life, a wrestler first, proud of the discipline that had built him. But something in him had shifted by the time the gymnasium finally emptied out near midnight. The mats rolled and stacked. The lights killed one bank at a time. He shook the small man's hand again at the door, this time without the edge that had opened the night, and asked, almost shyly, for a man his size, whether he might watch him train again sometime. "Any time you're willing to be thrown," the small man said, and for the first time all evening he smiled. Grebe laughed at that too, a real laugh, and the boxing coach, who had spent the whole exchange leaning forward on his folding chair like a man watching a much longer fight unfold in slow motion, finally spoke up. "I've trained fighters for 30 years, he said. "I've never seen a man's balance disappear like that, without a hand touching him more than once. What was the actual mechanism? Because from where I sat, it looked like nothing happened, and then everything had already happened." "That's close to correct," the small man said. "Most contests are decided before either person notices the moment where they were decided. A man commits his weight to a line, and if you're not standing on that line when the weight arrives, the contest is already over. The falling has just not caught up to the deciding yet. I didn't defeat his strength tonight. I only made sure his strength had nowhere to land. And if he hadn't overcommit, if he'd stayed patient, then I'd have needed a different answer, and probably a longer one," the small man admitted. "Nothing here works against a man who refuses to commit to anything. That's a different kind of contest, a much slower one, mostly won by whoever is more comfortable doing nothing for longer. Tonight wasn't that kind of night. Grebe, still catching his breath from the laugh, shook his head slowly. 22 years, and I've never had a conversation like this one after a match. Usually we talk about who was stronger. Nobody's ever made me think about where I was standing. That's usually the more useful question, the small man said. Strength answers how much. It rarely answers where or when. Most people spend a lifetime perfecting the first answer and never ask the other two. Nobody agrees anymore on exactly how the story spread from that gymnasium, whether it was the boxing coach who told it first over drinks to a fighter from another gym, or one of the judo players who couldn't stop describing the throw to anyone who'd listen. Within a few years, it had traveled far enough from its origin that the details had begun to drift the way details always do in stories people love enough to keep retelling. The city changed depending on who was telling it. The year slid a few times in either direction, and Grebe himself became, in some versions, a man twice his real size, in others a former Olympic champion rather than a man who had simply devoted his whole life to a demanding, unglamorous sport. What never changed, in any version anyone tells, is the line, "This is philosophy, not fighting," and the 7 seconds of silence that followed it, twice, once before the match and once after. Martial arts students still repeat it to each other, the way certain lines survive independent of whether the story around them ever happened exactly as told. It has become less a historical claim than a kind of teaching tool, a compact way of saying something that would otherwise take an entire lesson to explain. That real skill so rarely announces itself the way strength does, and that the most dangerous person in a room is sometimes the one who has stopped needing to prove anything at all. Whether it happened at a gymnasium above a hardware store, or in some other room in some other city, or nowhere at all except in the collective imagination of people who wanted a story about humility to be true. That part, the tellers admit, nobody can say for certain. What they will say, every time without fail, is this: for 7 seconds, nobody in that room made a sound, and that silence, real or invented, is the part of the legend that has outlasted every other detail. Once again, this is a fictional legend, written in the folkloric style that has grown up around Bruce Lee since his death. No part of it should be read as a factual or documented event, and the wrestler and the specific details of the encounter are entirely invented.